So we are back with Ammo to talk about the Talon in the adversary role. So first of all, Ammo, can you talk us through what the T-38 adversary role was and how this position came about for you?
Absolutely. And good morning, Mike. And great to be on with you again. So, the adversary role for the T-38 is basically if you think of a football team, whether we're talking about a football team in the UK sense or the American football sense, when the primary squad is getting ready for a big match, they're going to want to have a practice squad to go against in their drills and preparation. And it's to that primary squad's advantage that the practice squad replicates the adversary as close as possible. And that is the intent of any adversary squadron, whether it be in the UK or in the US. So the T-38A adversary air squadrons, or AD-AIR that we called it for short, were meant for just that. We'd start off all our briefs with our primary objective is to be professional red air and as close to a replication to a threat system as possible. And also, the T-38s are a cost-effective method of doing that. They're old jets, but they're relatively simple aircraft in that they're
Mhm.
pretty much jet engines strapped to an airframe and some electrics and hydraulics, and that's about it. There's no fancy flight control systems, no fancy modern day computers. So, relatively compared to modern day platforms, they're very easy to maintain, relatively cheap to operate. And as long as they can keep the airframes from falling apart from all the G
Yeah.
forces, they're fairly safe to operate. We can talk about the limitations of the platform in a little bit, but as something that's available and cost effective to operate. That's why the T-38A model was selected to form several adversary squadrons in the US.
Absolutely. So how did the position come about for you? Because I think you just went through your basic flying training and then you got put onto the ad role. Can you talk about this, Ammo?
Absolutely. So we're talking about 12, 13 years ago. Can't believe it's already been that long. It's gone by in a blink of an eye. But while we were going through pilot training, in that time frame, this was a relatively new concept to take students out of undergraduate pilot training, UPT, and send them directly to an adversary role. And my personal opinion, I thought this was a brilliant idea because without that option, if there's no fighter cockpit to send the student to, whether, based on whatever factors, economics or downsizing the military, there's a myriad of factors. But if there's no fighter cockpit to send the student to, then they need to send that student somewhere else,
Mhm.
probably flying heavies or tankers or elsewhere. So basically, a pilot training student who has been put through the fighter slash bomber track in pilot training, then they get sent to the airlift track. So this was a concept to create an option to basically pool potential fighter training applicants or fighter training graduates from pilot training and pool them in these adversary squadrons so that if extra openings came up in the basic courses, the B courses, then you could just quickly pull someone from these adversary squadrons and plug them right into a B course, and then you have basically no gaps in training, no empty spots because sadly injuries happen or other types of medical issues or for personal reasons someone will drop out of the course and they need a way to fill somebody quickly into there, and the adversary squadrons created that opportunity.
So yeah, why didn't the Air Force think about this a long time ago? Because it seems like a no-brainer almost.
Seems like it. I don't have the answer to that question, but yeah, about 12 years ago is when they started taking students right out of pilot training. I should say graduates. They're not students, they're graduates, and putting them in these adversary roles.
Yeah, let's stick to the T-38 then. So obviously you went to the Adversary Squadron. How did you feel about this? Like, were you excited for that role?
Yeah, I was very excited. So, when you complete your advanced phase of pilot training, for us, the fast jet phase, the T-38 phase, you fill out another dream sheet, and basically you list every single airframe in the Air Force that you could possibly go to, including heavy aircraft,
Mhm.
and you rank order them one through it was about 25 or 26 different kind of
Wow.
positions, because you also put your preferences as far as location as well.
Mhm.
So my dream was to fly the Raptor, and so that was number one on my list. But what was advertised to us was that if you put this adversary air role on your dream sheet, no matter where you put it, if you get selected for that, there is a possibility that you will then get picked up for a Raptor B course position
Ah.
at the end of that tour. So for me, that was a no brainer to put that as number two if I didn't get the Raptor as number one, because there was that possibility after that. And then I'm trying to think what I put after that. I don't remember now. But I was very interested in flying the F-15 and also the A-10. There's just something about the A-10 mission that was very appealing, and it's just that kind of specialized role in how they support the troops on the ground. So I think the A-10 was very high on my list as well after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you kind of mentioned it before, Ammo, but like, why do they use T-38As as well, not Cs?
Good question. So the C model was specifically adapted for a pilot training role. So not to get into all the geeky specifics, but one modification they made from the A model to the C model that's not so obvious is the air intakes on the engines were modified so that the T-38 C model performed much better at sea level at the cost of cruise performance. So the A model is very efficient in cruise. As you know, it was intended to be our first supersonic jet trainer, and so it was a very good higher such altitude jet. And when I say high altitude, I mean in the 30,000 foot
Yeah.
regime. Uh, but the way the jet was designed and originally conceived at sea level, it was more prone to compressor stalls, if I'm saying that correctly. I'm sure someone in the comments will be like, no, it was this or that. Someone who's more engineering savvy or
Yeah,
aeronautical engineering savvy than me, that's fine. Let us know in the comments below if I'm saying this wrong.
absolutely.
But the the C model, the air intakes were modified. If you look at pictures of them, the A model, the intakes were have a slight angle back, whereas in the C model, the intakes are vertical up and down.
Hmm.
And again, someone who's more savvy with aeronautical engineering will know why, but these intakes just performed better at sea level, which all of our pilot training bases are more or less closer to sea level. They're not high density altitude airfields. So this made them safer for pilot training. And then the most obvious difference are the avionics. So there's a HUD. They have some glass cockpit features in them. So more modern avionics, where the A model is just, if you see a picture of it, I'll try to send you one. It's just pure 1960s round dial steam gauges, no HUD, nothing. And in fact, the A model T-38 was intended to be the trainer for the Century series fighters. And
Mhm.
so the wing, the supersonic characteristics, all of it was meant to introduce student pilots to the handling characteristics of the Century series fighters. And if you look, mostly delta wing. Performance-wise, meant for speed, not really meant for lower speed maneuvering. And the A model actually killed a lot of student pilots. So you have to respect the jet.
Mhm.
It will go out of control and kill you if you're not careful, if you don't keep your speed up and fly the jet. Whereas modern day jets are so forgiving, have such a large flight regime, very forgiving. The flight control systems will save you in a pinch. They won't let you depart the jet out of control.
Mhm.
But this jet, you were eliminated out of pilot training by dying. It was something that
Right.
you just had to really keep an eye on. Another difference between the A model and the C model, and someone might ask, where's the B model? I think, if I remember this correctly, they created a ground attack version that never really, sorry the pun, never really took off. I believe that was the B model. Also, NASA adapted the A model to their astronaut trainers. So somewhere in there, the T-38B model is in that. Let us know in the comments below if you know the real reason where the B model was. But
Yeah.
we jumped from the A model to the C model. Uh, the ejection seat in the A model was an old, I believe. Don't catch me. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was a Martin Baker model that had a very limited envelope, and so basically, if I remember correctly, once you tipped in on your final approach, if you had to eject, you were going to die because
Wow.
uh, if you had a certain sink rate or a certain height above the ground, it just wasn't sufficient for the seat to leave the aircraft and for the parachute to uh, fully inflate and get you safely to the ground. Whereas the C model has much less restricted ejection envelope and was way safer. So bottom line, the C model, way safer for pilot training and much better adapted for the pilot training environment, where a less experienced student pilot is more apt to make handling errors with it.
Being an adversary pilot, did you have to change the way you had to think and fly coming from your initial training? And can you talk us through some of your training on the T-38A?
Yeah, great question. As far as flying the jet itself, being pretty much the same airframe, the A model versus the C model, flying it handling wise was very similar. Adapting to the avionics only took a couple flights. I mean, we're talking about, yeah, you hop in, you just get used to developing a new cross check with the steam
Right.
gauges. You had an instructor in the back. And so I think it was half a dozen flights that I did
Hmm.
to adapt to the A model. It was a quick conversion. But what steepened the learning curve was now you had to shift your mindset to being that adversary platform. So we actually had we call it the vault, where the classified materials are stored. And so you were expected, once you got to the squadron, to be in that vault multiple hours a day
Wow.
studying the what we called the threat guide and learning adversary systems, adversary missiles, and learning how to take this T-38A and, to the best of our ability, replicate that to, in this case, it was the F-22 that we were primarily being an adversary platform for. And that took a while and took some training flights to adapt that mindset. But once you got the hang of it and realized that your role was to get the blue air ready for combat, it was something that it was no issue taking seriously, and something that, at least for me, was very fulfilling and rewarding, knowing that I was helping prepare our frontline pilots for their primary mission.
Yeah, and obviously the T-38 has reheat as well. Could you actually feel that power?
Yeah, you could feel it.
Oh wow.
Yeah, the pretty much all of our takeoffs were in reheat, afterburner for our American audiences listening. But you really could feel it once you kicked in the burners on takeoff. You did feel that acceleration. Now, compared to Raptor or Typhoon, no, it was fractional to the type of acceleration you feel when you kick in the burners on those. But you still felt it, and it was still a thrill to kick in those burners and roll down the runway in reheat. So always enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in your opinion, Amo, what did the or does the T-38A do well and not so well?
So what it does well is being cost effective to an extent. However, what it doesn't do well as a threat replication platform is it doesn't really do anything as far as emitting radar signals because it doesn't have a radar. We can put a jamming pod on it
Oh
to
wow.
replicate different types of electronic countermeasures that a frontline pilot may encounter out in the theater. But as far as trying to trigger a radar warning system or other types of threats in the electronic spectrum, the T-38 is limited because it has no radar. But it is a piece of metal that's out there. It can go supersonic. It doesn't turn very well because of its short wingspan. So its rate of turn is not great. So if you want to go and BFM a fourth or fifth gen platform, that is going to be over pretty quickly unless the uh, pilot in the fourth or fifth gen platform really porks away their BFM execution, which does happen. And so
Mhm.
you go to a merge expecting to lose, but always looking for them to make that critical mistake that you can punish so that they become better. And if
Yeah.
they make no mistakes and you die within half a turn, great. They've executed and they've done their job. But if they don't manage their energy well, or if their pre merge game plan was messed up, and you're able to induce an error and punish that error and call a kill over the radio and bring that back to the debrief and lessons were learned, then you've done your job and you've helped that pilot become better.
And I'm always interested to know this, Ambo. So, how do you come up with the syllabus yourself, or the squadron, or does like an F-22 squadron call you up and say, "Right, we want you to act like a MiG-29 today"? How does that work?
It's a little bit of both. So, yes, the customer in this case were the
Yeah.
Raptor squadrons. Where I was at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. So whether we replicated against the B course with students learning
Mm.
the Raptor or the frontline squadron that was there, they would contact us with what requirements, what platform they wanted us to replicate. And then we would then take that and we would create an internal game plan of what types of maneuvers we were going to show them, what types of jamming we would replicate with our ECM pods. And basically, we just huddle up and come up with our own coordination to try and induce as many errors and generate as many problems as possible for them
Mm.
to solve so that they were getting the best bang for the buck in the approximately 30 minutes or so that we had in the airspace with them. So definitely teamwork with them giving us the requirements and the threat replication that they desired, and then internally coming up with the game plan in order to meet those objectives.
Was there ever a point where, like, a squadron or a type said, "We want you to replicate this, we want you to do that," and you just said, "We can't do that. There's no chance."
Not often because the squadrons understood our limitations,
Mm.
and so quite often, actually, we would mix in with fourth or fifth gen red air. So
Hmm.
sometimes a raptor or a pair of raptors would be allocated to red air, and we would then have our own uh, pre-mission briefing with them, and the raptors would replicate more advanced threats, and on the T-38 side we would replicate less advanced threats, or we would be, let's say, a bomber threat. So we would maybe go low level and try to do a fast low level ingress with the Raptors replicating top cover, and so giving the blue air that type of problem to try to solve, of sanitizing both high and low, and who are they going to allocate to take out the escort, who are they going to allocate to take out the bomber threat. So we could replicate that well as far as a third or fourth gen bomber platform. And often there would be a line that would be drawn. We called it the mission fail line. And if the T-38 got to that line, that simulated the threat platform getting to
Right.
a drop zone, or being within range to employ their air to ground weaponry and cause mission failure. So it was actually kind of fun to go what we call dark visor down, and just basically point toward that mission fail line and go as fast as we possibly could and try to get there before we got killed. And it was easy, but there was a little bit of fun in that to see if we could get there. And sometimes we did get there, and it was a little bit of a thrill to the code word we always often use was Miller time. So we'd call Miller time over the radio, and then all the blue air knew that they lost, and so you could almost feel their excitement just deflating at that moment right there. And you knew, okay, this is going to be an interesting debrief, because for some reason mission fail happened, and there were going to be some lessons learned driven. But it didn't happen often, but sometimes it did. And so we knew, all right, this is going to be interesting.
And did you always fly out with Tyndall, or did you ever get to go on large exercises like Red Flag or Maple Flag, anything like that?
I didn't go to Red Flag in the T-38, but we did go to New Orleans with the F-22B course, and we mixed
Oh,
in with
nice.
the F-15Cs with the Louisiana Guard there, and that was a really fun exercise. I think we had a B-2 show up on one of those
Oh,
flights,
wow.
and so they were doing B-2 escort, and so my job was to try to kill the B-2. Spoiler alert: I didn't, because I don't even have a radar, and even if I had a radar, that wouldn't have worked. And so
Yeah.
um, we were relying on our red command and control to kind of give us ideas of where the B2 might be. And so that was kind of a frustrating flight, because I wanted to kill the B2, but I didn't. But yeah,
Yeah.
we went to New Orleans, and that was great fun, because there was no pressure on us. We were there just to be professional replication, and then just have fun on the
Yeah.
on the downtime. So that was a great experience. I know now that the T-38s will go to other exercises as well. I'm not exactly sure if nowadays they're going to Red Flag. I do know that they go to Volk Field up in Wisconsin to provide threat replication there. But someone who's flying ad air now, let us know in the comments below. Are you going to Red Flag? That'd be interesting.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And I have to ask, on your time, Ammo, did you ever get to swap notes or talk to, the Navy aggressors or the Marine aggressors and kind of think like, oh, what you doing here, what you doing there, like anything like that?
Not too much, sadly. I would imagine nowadays there's better crosstalk. And
Hmm.
one thing that we're trying to do as a U.S. military in general is get that crosstalk happening more and more. So more conferences, more exercises, more joint force type activities, so that we are doing that lateral engagement with the other branches. So I guarantee you nowadays that type of crosstalk is happening at a better level than it did 11 years ago, 12 years ago.
And obviously, we talked to you previously on the F-22 and the Typhoon, but can you talk us through an average day on, was it the second fighter squadron here? And
It
was it
was.
different?
Yep.
Was that a lot different, from a frontline squadron as such?
It had a lot of similarities as far as your day to day. So if you back up to the previous day, you're pretty much watching the scheduling board and
Mm,
seeing if you're flying the next day. Um, Oftentimes, the scheduling shops or the prog shops in RAF parlance,
yeah.
they would try to schedule about a week, maybe 2 weeks out, so that you have a rough idea of which days you're flying and which days you're stuck on the ground. And obviously, those schedules are very subject to change based on a myriad of factors. We always called it a
Mhm.
house of cards, subject to collapse at
Right,
any
yeah.
moment. So on the afternoon prior, we would hawk the schedule and see if we actually were going to fly and who we'd fly against. And oftentimes the coordination would start at that point, the day prior. So
Mhm.
oftentimes you would contact the flight lead of your flight, and the if you were the flight lead of your flight, you would contact the flight lead of a Blue Air flight and just
Mhm.
kind of have an initial, how's it going? Hey, what do you need tomorrow? How can we help at this point? And you would probably spend the last part of your day doing some initial prep for that, whether it's getting out a map and kind of just coming up with a rough idea. Okay, we're going to replicate this platform, and this is where we'll go. You might start making your lineup card that you'll slap on your knee board the next day, just to reduce the amount of pre-mission prep that you'll be doing the next morning, because often you'll be there quite early in the morning, maybe 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, to start your pre-mission briefs. So if you are flying the first go or first wave of the next morning, you'll get up, eat breakfast, get to the squadron, and usually it starts with what's called a mass brief, and that is everybody together in one room, blue air, red air, command and control, or C2, if they're available to be there in
Mhm.
person. If not, they'll often be teleconned in. And the primary mission commander or blue flight lead is going to run this mass brief. And we cover a lot of admin and what we call motherhood. So, weather, any NOTAMs that are applicable, any special interest items, any FCIFs, flight crew information file, anything that everyone needs to know, anything that's pertinent for that flight, we're going to cover. Primary mission objectives, what's wanted out of Red Air, and basically admin to and from the airspace, and any type of admin in the airspace, uh, such as coordination with C2, what altimeter setting are we all going to use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, training rules. Most of it's repetitive, but essential that we all cover so that we're all on the same page from a safety standpoint. Another thing that's covered are sanctuary altitudes or altitude blocks that we're all going to adhere to so that we don't clap two aircraft together, because that's
Yeah.
probably the most dangerous part of these large exercises, and that many aircraft in the air, especially T-38s with no radars. The altitude deconfliction is of primary importance, and knowing who's going to be at what altitude, that is something that we definitely emphasize in these type of mass briefs, so that if push comes to shove, if there's weather, if there's comm or sensor breakdowns, we're going to flinch to those altitudes and we're going to stay safe. And then after those mass briefs, we'll break up into our individual element briefs to brief the specifics of our own formation. So after that, there might be a red mass brief, where, especially if there's multiple platforms such as F-22s and T-38s mixing together, we'll do our own kind of mass cohort brief for Red Air, and then we'll split up into then our formation or element briefs from then and cover the specifics of what we're going to execute in that. So this whole process takes close to 2 hours
Wow.
when you factor in, showing up at the squadron. got to have your morning coffee, of course, and getting your maps and products and everything ready to go, and all of the briefs, getting all that done. Yeah, you're pushing 2 hours once that's all said and done, and then you got to go. You got to sign out your jet with the who would be the duty auth in the RAF. We
Yep.
call it the top three in the U.S. Air Force. And then you go and you get on your kit and grab everything, walk out to the jet, and off you go. And so you go and execute the mission. So all of this work to probably fly just over an hour.
Yeah.
And with the T-38, there's no air-to-air refueling, so you're done. So in some of these longer exercise type scenarios where what we call the vulnerability period or the vol, it may last 2 or 3 hours because they've got tanker support out there. So what we would do is we would just plan 2 or 3 different formations that would launch in staggered time frames so that we could provide continuous threat replication throughout that 2 or 3 hour vol because we couldn't aerial refuel. So that's normally how we would do logistically cover something like that. But normally we're talking about a shorter vol for kind of your more week to week, smaller type exercises. And so you'd fly that, you'd recover, get out of your kit, just kind of have a few minutes to grab some refreshments, grab some popcorn, and then there's usually a pre-coordinated debrief time. So if you've got a few extra minutes, you'll kind of start gathering your notes. Maybe you'll meet in the squadron bar with the rest of your element mates and kind of just do a quick once over big picture overview. How did the flight go? Compare notes, and then you'll go to your debrief mass coordination brief where you'll cover the specifics of admin to and from, basically talking about, did we execute the mission most efficiently? And so we start with an admin mass debrief where we talk about, okay, were there any issues from startup, ground ops, taxi, takeoff to the airspace, and then recovery from the airspace? Was there anything of note? Were there anything concerning safety wise? Was air traffic control a factor? It's all kinds of things. It's very exhaustive. This is why these debriefs sometimes take 4, 5, 6 hours, because we are going through every detail to make sure that safety and training are as optimal as we can be. And so after that admin portion, then we will go into what's called a shot validation, or shot val. And there's a software system we use called iCADS that it takes the radar and air traffic control data and puts your aircraft on the screen as an icon. And so all the aircraft involved in the training are there on the screen. You can see their tracks. And we have this whole litany and whole script that we go through to where every shot that was taken and every kill that was called over the radio, we pause the playback at that point. We go over it and we validate whether or not it was valid for a kill or not. And this is probably a whole other hour-long discussion of how we do this and how we war game this. But this is how we try to train as realistically as possible, using these probability of kill tables and calculations, and trying to figure out, did red air die, did blue air die, and how did that affect the mission? And so this could go on for about 30 minutes to an hour, the shot val, and everyone's taking furious notes, and we basically get a rough idea of what are the facts. We don't necessarily come to a conclusion of why was the mission successful or why did the mission fail, but at least this shot validation helps give us the facts of what happened, so that we can then take those facts and then we can break up into our individual debriefs, and then we can start spinning everybody's tapes, and we can take these facts and we can start constructing a debrief where we start coming up with what we call DFPs, debrief focal points, and we start coming up with root causes and contributing factors. And it's basically an investigation of what happened and what caused the mission to fail, if it failed, and identifying the root cause. And this is mostly happening on the blue air side. But if we messed up on the red air side, if we didn't replicate the threat as professionally as we could, then we'll go into our own little debrief of, where did we make the error? How did we execute not in accordance with our standards or with the threat replication guide? And we make ourselves better. We sometimes we have to take it on the chin and eat a slice of humble pie of say, hey, okay, hey, you screwed up here, and it's not to make you feel bad. It's okay. This is where you didn't conform to the standards or the threat rep guide, and this is how you can do better in the future. Questions, and we talk about it. And part of being a fighter pilot, whether on blue or red, is having the humility to be able to accept I messed up, and I'm going to do a better job next time. And that's why sometimes these days can be 13, 14 hours long on a red air side. It's usually not that long because we're just going through the script, and if we cause them to make errors, great. But if we all get killed and they win the day, we all high five and we go home and we did our job. So the day-to-day for us is usually closer to a normal 8-hour day. On the blue air side, it could be a very, very long day, especially if somebody is doing an instructor upgrade or a flight lead upgrade. These could really draw out because there is a lot of instruction that's going on to make that future instructor, that future flight lead, as lethal as possible to the enemy, not us.
I mean, what a fascinating insight there. Oh, bloody hell, that was really great, Ammo. But I have to ask one question. What happens if the weather's bad? Do you think sometimes, oh, thank God, a little day off, or do you still have to work for that day? Or if
So
you
we
go,
have, yeah, good question. We have training rules that specify different levels of execution based on the weather that's out there. So we do have IMC training rules that do allow us to still execute in the weather, but it limits for example, the amount of maneuvering that we can do just to increase safety. So if there's bad weather out there, mainly with visibility, clouds of visibility, if there's thunderstorms, we're not going to go because any type of airframe going into a thunderstorm is not a good idea. So if the airspace is just full of thunderstorms, we're just going to cancel and go another day. But if it's just bad visibility, very cloudy, but not a threat as far as turbulence or convection, then we can still go. It's just we're more limited in the maneuvering that we can do. Not to bring up a sad point, but several years ago, those in the UK may remember that sadly a young USAF F-15 pilot lost his life out of Lakenheath. And I actually flew that day. I wasn't in that exercise, but I was flying the Typhoon that day. And we went to the north part of the training airspace. That exercise, the Lakenheath mishap, was happening in the southern part of the airspace. And I remember the clouds were stacked from about 500 feet AGL all the way up into the mid 20,000s. And I just remember thinking, my goodness, how can we get any training done in this? But they executed, and sadly, that young wingman who was very new on the F-15C got disorientated in the weather, and he lost his life crashing into the North Sea. And that investigation has been released. The accident investigation report is available online for those who want to read further into that. But that's a very sad example of how if the visibility is poor in the airspace,
Hmm.
the risk and the danger increases, and we have to be very careful that we are adhering to our IMC training rules to prevent mishaps like that.